The hardest part usually wasn't one catastrophic moment. It was repetition. Waking up sore again, you get blisters when your feet are wet are weird because rocks and debris start to go into your skin. It's the weirdest feeling. Feeling lonely for weeks instead of hours, even though you're surrounded by people. It's a strange concept. In my opinion, the adversity was cumulative. The hikers who adapted best weren't necessarily the toughest people. They were the ones who learned how to, I call it that I had to break everything down into the smallest possible unit of measurement. But instead of thinking, I have 1,500 miles left, I thought, I just need to get to town, lunch, the next water source, even the next Snickers bar. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of resilience is just learning how to make hard things psychologically survivable in smaller pieces.
Welcome to the Blue Rose Podcast. I'm your host, Becca Blue Rose, a runner, storyteller, and believer in creating a life that feels like your own. Some weeks it's just you and me, and other weeks I'm joined by women who are chasing their own version of a bold, unapologetic life. Together we explore what it really means to take risks and trust your own path. Savannah is a long-distance hiker, researcher, and author whose work examines how motivation, endurance, and community evolve under sustained challenge. She has logged over 20,000 miles on long-distance trails across the U.S. and conducted nearly 100 interviews with thru-hikers, pairing qualitative research with lived experience to understand why people keep going when initial motivation fades. Her work bridges outdoor culture, psychology, and everyday life, focusing less on grit and achievement and more on adaptability, belonging, and the decisions that shape long-term persistence. Her talks blend research, storytelling, and reflection, offering audiences both insight and practical language for navigating uncertainty and sustained effort. She is the author of Between the Miles, Inside the Minds of Appalachian Trail Thru-Hikers, a narrative nonfiction book grounded in the Appalachian Trail research. Savannah speaks to outdoor communities, nonprofits, universities, and organizations interested in resilience, performance, and human-centered endurance. Please welcome Savannah to the show.
Thanks for having me. My name's Savannah, and I am an author and a public speaker. I was a music teacher for 7-8 years, and then I tried out outdoor education for 3 to 4 years. Couldn't do it for the public school system anymore. Went back to grad school for a couple years when I was 30 and changed careers for the, third time-ish. And yeah, so my path has not been linear, to say the least, but where I'm at, I think I'm enjoying it the most.
How did you get into thru-hiking?
I was extremely naive, and I was researching ultramarathons because I used to be an ultramarathon runner when I was way more fit in my 20s. And I will be honest, I literally thought the long trail, if you've heard of the Vermont Long Trail, it goes through the state of Vermont from Mass to Canada. And I thought it was an ultramarathon because I just saw people that were walking it instead of running. I'm like, well, my body can do that because I sometimes have a hard time just running so far of a distance, just physically. My body's not built for it. And so I just did the long trail in between. I was living in North Dakota on an Indian reservation, and one of the summers I just needed to get away, and I tried the long trail, but I'd been working up to it. So I'll take you back a little bit. So when I left Texas, I'm from Texas, lived in Houston and grew up there, and then lived in Dallas for about 9 years. And I had an adventure partner. It was my boyfriend. And we climbed together, hiked together. We did everything. That's how I got into backpacking. We did the Teton Crest Trail together. And then I did a NOLS course for 35 days for an outdoor educator course to see if I wanted to switch to outdoor education. And I did. Then that's when I moved to Ohio and taught the outdoor school for REI. And I no longer had an adventure partner because he stayed in Texas. And so I had to relearn how to adventure by myself. So that's kind of where it all started. So REI was really easy to find my people because you're all outdoorsy there. And so that was nice. So we could all go on trail runs together or hikes together or whatever. And so I started with overnights with friends, and then trail runs by myself, trail runs with friends, overnights by myself, weekends by myself. And then didn't really get very good pay. And so I went back to teaching. That's why I moved to the Indian Reservation in North Dakota. And that was like a town of 700 people. So it was the most by myself I've ever felt and been. And it was like an hour and a half each weekend to get groceries. It was that kind of vibe, like gravel roads, you know.
Yeah.
I taught K through 12, so I knew every single student because there was only like 300. And so that's why I started running, because kind of I had time and I was listening to a lot of endurance podcasts. I wanted to see if I could be like these incredible people that I was listening to all the time. And so I just started running the roads and the dirt roads. And that's why I got into ultra marathon running. So it just escalated. And then I started exploring different towns nearby and running further and further. And I learned that I could do more by myself, and I felt fine. And I was extremely competent, more than I thought I was, at least. And then when I did the long trail, that's when it started to become clear that it's like, oh, wow, I can do this by myself and I don't need an adventure partner. So North Dakota, as hard as that time was for me, it flipped the switch of I can do so much more than I thought. I've always been independent, but this is a new level of independence. You know, when you tell people you've thru hiked, they're like, oh my gosh, I can never do that. But really, after, 20,000 miles, it's like, well, I'm just walking with a lot of logistics. Like, it's not that hard when you think about it, but I can see how it's hard when people look at it from the outside perspective, because they're like, how do you resupply? What do you eat? What do you do when you see a big animal? How do you deal with weather? And so, yeah, those things are difficult, but I find it a little easier than what I was doing. And so it's a different kind of challenge. Like I always say, when I'm climbing, if I forget something, I could go back to the car. But when I started backpacking, it was a different kind of challenge, because it's not just like a road. Eventually there's a road, but you can't just leave right away. You have to find a road, you have to keep going. And so it was a different kind of challenge. And so that's kind of how I got into it, a long-winded way of saying how I got into it. I just kind of had to relearn adventure by myself and realized I can do this thing, not in the sense of like, I don't need anybody, but just, I don't need to wait to go do these adventures to wait for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is like really hard to learn, honestly. Like you were saying that, and I was like, no, like it's like really easy to go do stuff when you have someone that wants to go do them with you. And it's just like a whole new experience when it's like I'm getting myself up and I'm going out in the dark and I'm on my own, or not even in the dark, but it's definitely a bigger challenge. And so I'm curious, right? You have your book and you interviewed people on the Appalachian Trail. So now, did you do the Appalachian Trail before you interviewed people, or have you only done it once and that's when you were interviewing people? So like walk me through that and like what through hikes you have done.
Okay. I'll give you just like the big ones. Yeah, I don't remember honestly every single one, and I'll probably skip one. But the first one I did was a Teton Crest Trail, like I mentioned. That got me into it. I have a tattoo of the Tetons on my arm. It's just the most
Love
special
it.
place to me. Yeah, I've done that one twice now. Honestly, I only did the AT for a graduate thesis, and so before that, I'd done the long trail, the Centennial Trail, which goes across South Dakota. It's just like 110 miles, and the Lone Star Trail in Texas, which
Okay.
is there, and that's why I did it. And
Love it.
so in grad school, I did 2 master's degrees. And for one, I had a thesis, and it was going to be on the motivations of ultramarathon runners, how we push past the multiple metaphorical walls, motivation wise. And so then I don't know why, maybe because I had just done a few short thru hikes, but I switched to thru hikers. And then I was in Southern Ohio, so the foothills of the Appalachians. And so I just switched to thru hikers. And I was going to interview them at the beginning, middle, and end of their hike. And then my advisor I think he made his first joke with me. And he's like, why don't you just go hike the AT? I'm like, waiting for the punchline, and there was none. And so 4 weeks later, I had everything dehydrated, my own food, and all of my color-coded spreadsheets made. And I was on the AT. And so, yeah, I interviewed hikers along the way because it was part of my graduate thesis. And so
Okay.
finishing was not a requirement, but it was a requirement in my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it wouldn't have affected my thesis. It's just, I just needed to get the interviews. But I wasn't going to go back and do that trail again. So I wanted to finish. There were some things like deadline and a little bit of weather that prevented doing every single part, because I only had a 3-month deadline, which is insane for the AT. And so I had full disclosure, I did have to go back like couple months after I finished the AT and finished the sections that I missed. But that's not a big deal to me. But yeah, so I just wanted to finish. But yeah, so I did
Yeah.
the interviews while I was hiking, usually in town because I feel less bad about asking people for their time when they're stationary, and it's just easier. Couple times on the trail, I just feel so bad because your time is so limited on the trail, and I get it. And so I just hate asking people for, hey, do you want to sit down for an interview while your feet hurt and your knees are bothering you and you're probably hungry and you have like 10 more miles to do? But
Yeah.
I did it. And if they say no, it's okay. It's just one more practice and rejection, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess what kind of questions were you asking these people? And I'm curious, like, what you learned from all the interviews that you did.
Well, I can go through a couple things. So the main three things, I started at just motivation, but I added on adversity and community. Those are the three aspects, the main aspects that I talk about. Although I also go through confidence, identity, things like that. And so in regards to the three, let's talk about a little bit about adversity. And so what surprised me was that the hardest part usually wasn't one catastrophic moment. It was repetition. Waking up sore again, putting on wet socks, that was a big one. I had a record rain year. Hiking in rain for, fifth day in a row. At one
Oof.
point, I had started the beginnings, not actual full, but I started to get trench foot, and that was really scary. You get blisters when your feet are wet are weird because rocks and debris start to go into your skin. It's the weirdest feeling.
Huh.
But also feeling lonely for weeks instead of hours, even though you're surrounded by people. It's a strange concept. So in my opinion, the adversity was cumulative. And so the hikers who adapted best weren't necessarily the toughest people. They were the ones who learned I call it that I had to break everything down into the smallest possible unit of measurement. So instead of thinking, I have 1,500 miles left, I thought, I just need to get to town, lunch, the next water source, even the next Snickers bar. And so a lot of resilience is just learning how to make hard things psychologically survivable in smaller pieces. Does that
Okay.
resonate?
Yeah. No, I think it does because I mean, even you saying, okay, someone from the outside, like looking at doing the PCT, Appalachian Trail, whatever it is, all these big hikes, like for me, I'm like, that feels very overwhelming because I'm thinking of it from like the outside view of like the whole picture. But it's like, okay, if you break it down and you're like, my first step is like knowing how many miles that trail is, or like getting a backpack and like maybe going on a hike or something like, right? Like there's so many first steps that you have to get through before you're like actually on the trail. It's interesting that you started with ultra marathons because I think of like, right, an ultra marathon usually doesn't like, yes, there's 200 milers now, but it's like, right, like you're kind of 50 to 100 is like usually the average of like what people are running. And it's like, that's such a short, sustained period of time. That's like, I know for 24 hours to 30 hours, this is going to suck and this is going to be hard. And then I'll go home and it'll be fine and I'll be comfortable. But like that day in and day out being like, this is hard and my feet hurt and I have blisters. It's like, that's the piece that I'm like, yeah, like how do you get through that? And how do you decide for not just a month, but like months that you are going to continue to do this when you could easily just like not, like you could just decide, you know what, I'm going home today.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of good topics, and I'll only touch on a couple because you said, like, where would I even start? And I think the main thing there for me is that two things is that the first part of anything new is the hardest part. So starting is the hardest thing you're going to do because of all the psychological lead up that you have. I try to answer questions and mentor a couple groups on like Facebook and other hiking groups of new hikers. And I don't answer all the gear questions because you get too many people answering those anyway. But if it's a
Mm-hmm.
specific question that I know I can provide, I try to answer it. And you don't know how many people are asking the same exact thing. It's like, how do I start? I'm too scared. I can't do this. This is too overwhelming. It's like, yeah. And the other thing is that leads into that is that anytime you start something new, you're probably going to be bad at it, or at least not good. There's a learning
Mm-hmm.
curve with everything. So the hardest part is starting. And then being okay with being bad at something new. And so I think a lot of people can't do those two things. And so it prevents them from starting. And the other thing is, yeah, I think ultramarathon runners are, you know, incredible and strong, and we can learn a lot from them. And I think we haven't really tapped into this network of thru hikers, sure, here and there, but the sustained aspect is what's interesting and different. And yeah, you can tell yourself, I can do anything for 30 minutes, an hour, maybe even 24 hours for some people.
Mhm.
But for 3 to 6 months, for 6 to 8 months, I mean, that's where it is, um, dealing with everything. And so that leads me to the motivation aspect. And so we talked about adversity. And so I want to talk about just briefly the motivation aspect. And so early motivation is usually really individualistic, and people in my study at least started for the freedom, the challenge, and the escape. Sometimes to prove something to themselves or other people, start over. But over time, it becomes more relational and meaningful. People keep going because of who they've become, who they've met, or because the trail has started reflecting parts of themselves that they didn't really pay attention to before. And one thing I heard repeatedly was a version of, I stopped hiking for the finish line somewhere along the way, usually after halfway. So the motivation became less about achievement and more about identity, connection, and meaning.
Why are these people going out on the trail in the first place? Did you find that like people's whys became stronger as they progressed in the trail and like they had these experiences and realized like, oh, I can do this thing. Like my socks have been wet for 5 days, but like I got through it and it's fine and now it's a beautiful day and I can keep going? Or did you encounter anyone that like didn't have a super strong why and then didn't end up finishing it? Or
Yeah, there are definitely people that didn't finish it. And some people
Mhm.
just started because I am going to grad school and I want to have an adventure before, or, I want to do this before I have a family. There were two people that did it because literally their motivation was it sounded cool. And
I love
so,
that.
yeah, there were all kinds of reasons. Um, I think the things that mostly kept people going was so I think two main things. So learned competence. And what I mean by that is when you see that you can do something, you get more motivation. It's like whenever you start a new hobby or, skill or whatever, and you're working at it, you're not very good at it, like we said earlier. But if you keep working at it, you see that you usually will get better. And as that competence grows, the motivation grows and confidence grows. And when all those things coincide and that consistent effort adds up over time, even if it doesn't feel like it is. And then the other thing was the community played a larger aspect than I ever or anyone ever imagined, including the people I interviewed. And one thing, at least I underestimated, is how difficult it is to quit when other people are emotionally invested in your well being. And if people aren't, oh, I'm sure you are, but if people aren't aware, we call them trail families. It's just people, it's either a couple or three or four. I've seen even groups up to 14 and people you can just camp with, and it's your new group, basically your new family. And trail families normalize struggle. And so somebody else is also cold. Somebody else is also scared and doubting themselves, and their knees also hurt. And I don't relish in your struggle, but it does make me feel better that I'm not alone. And that shared experience interrupts the feeling that something is uniquely wrong with me. And sometimes people don't keep hiking because they're motivated. They keep hiking because somebody saved them a spot at camp or checked in on them after a hard day or expected to see them in the morning. And belonging becomes a stabilizing force.
Mhm. So, do you think that having that group experience adds or takes away from the entire experience, right? Because I think a lot of people, at least, when I look at like things like the PCT or the JMT or the Appalachian Trail, it's like part of me has always had this idea that people go out there for the solitude and to not see anyone and to be on their own in this isolation and kind of like have this like confrontation with themselves. And so then it's when I'm talking to you and there's like this idea of a trail family and you run into people, it's like yeah, are you running into people the whole time? And is having this new trail family, like, is that, I don't know if it necessarily makes your experience worse. It's more of just like, do you get to choose that? Or is there like, can you also choose to have a solo experience on the trail? Because
Okay,
the trails have gotten so much more popular.
for sure, and especially the AT. All right, you touched on a couple of things, so I'm gonna try to answer all of
Yeah,
them.
sorry, I
Yes.
have like 6
No, no,
questions
no,
in
it's good.
one.
I'm just gonna try to make sure I remember all of them. Yes, you can choose, of course. You cannot choose how many people you come across, but you can choose whether or not you want to solo hike for sure. It's harder in my experience on more crowded trails to have that solitude experience. And so I always, whenever I used to teach how to plan long distance hikes. And part of that planning is, why are you doing this hike? And so if you want solitude to be part of that hike, and of course, if you're more experienced in this example, maybe you go do the Pacific Northwest Trail because there's like 100 people that are doing it. Maybe more now, but when I was doing it was like 150. And on the AT and the PCT now, it's upwards of, 5 to 7,000 that are attempting it. And so, or at least that are on it. And so it depends. I think it's helpful to start out knowing what kind of experience you want. But at the same time, that changes because everyone that I interviewed, all but one hiker started alone, but only 3 finished alone in those that I interviewed. And yes, my sample size is small, but I think it is significant and it tracks with other interviews that I've done because I've done the same research on the Pacific Crest Trail, the Pacific Northwest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. I forgot to tell you the other trails that I did earlier, and those are some of them, including the Triple
It's
Crown and the
okay.
Pacific Northwest. So those are the big ones. Um, so yes, and that's part of the beginning choosing the trail motivation. So I'll get into a little bit of hikers and I guess my own experience. And so um, a lot of highly independent people secretly attach morality to self-sufficiency and they feel safer needing nobody. I can relate to that and sometimes in my life too. On trail, eventually it seems like most people become more vulnerable, whether due to injury, fear, loneliness, bad weather, motivation crashes, navigation mistakes. Everyone needs help eventually. We don't do anything alone in life. Even if it feels like we do, someone helped us along the way. And so I think it's easier to see on something like a thru hike because what hikers often struggle with wasn't receiving help physically, it was emotionally accepting that needing support didn't make them weaker. And that was something that I struggled with. And
Mhm.
one of the biggest shifts I saw in other people was realizing community isn't the opposite of strength. In many cases, it's what makes endurance possible. And so I've had trail families on the Pacific Northwest Trail and the AT. And then other trails, it was mostly solo. And on the PCT, I hiked with some people off and on in Washington, but otherwise it was about 87% solo. On the CDT, I hiked with someone for 10 days out of 5 months. And so, and on the CDT, I was ahead of the bubble because I kind of bounced around. I flipped up to avoid some weather and I was ahead of everyone. So I was alone for 50 days, 50. And I didn't see another hiker unless I was in town talking to locals. And so the experience with other people for me is more enjoyable when, at the end of the day, you're hurting and you're just like, tell me a story, tell me something to get my mind off of my
Mhm.
pains everywhere.
Yeah.
It's helpful when I go through bad weather. Like, is it just me? Am I experiencing this and no one else is? Do I just like not know how to go through hailstorms and thunderstorms at 13,500 feet and everybody else is just extremely competent and it's just me? In those moments, it's really helpful. It's nice to get my mind off of it. On the AT, I laughed almost the entire time. Like the end, I was in pain. It was hurting, but my hiking partner, it was extremely fun and that was nice. But the other trails, it was also nice to be alone because logistical things. It was easier to hitch and people are more inclined to offer you like, hey, do you need to stay at my house? Well, yes, I should. Okay. But they're not going to do that if you're in a group of 7 or
Mhm.
they're not going to do it as often. At least I've noticed. And so I think you're more inclined, at least from my experience, I'm more inclined to talk to people when I'm in town if I'm alone. if I'm with a group, I'm talking to my group. And so that's the
Mhm.
aspect I like is I talk to more people. I've met so many more people when I hike solo, um, whether from getting rides, staying at their houses, or being at a restaurant and just literally turning to my side because I'm lonely and saying, "Hi, let's talk. I'm lonely. Talk to me." Um,
Mhm.
so to me, there's pros and cons. Not really cons, just different experiences.
Mhm. That's crazy though that you were alone for 50 days, and I just feel like I need to unpack that a little bit and talk to you
All
about that experience because,
right, let's go for it.
like, I'm just curious, like, what it's funny, at work, every day, we have, like, a question jar, and we, like, pull out questions, and yesterday's question was, like, "What is your favorite, like, recreational activity?" And, like, "What are you thinking about when you're, like, when you're out on a trail?" You know, 'cause I am an ultra runner, like, running is my favorite hobby, and my other friend, like, loves to ski, and so he's over here like, "Oh, I'm just, like, singing and making songs," and I'm over here like, I'm contemplating what's going on in my life, like, so I'm curious, like, over the span of 50 days, it's like, what does that do to your mind, and, like, what are you thinking at different points of this, and also, like, what does that do to your sense of self of, like, you have so much time to think?
It was different on earlier trails. When I was alone on the PCT, I would do different social and self experiments. Like, what if I just smiled all day at every single person? What would happen? Just random things because I'm a weirdo. And so I think it was different parts of my life. And on the CDT, I think I was in my mid 30s. And so it was more like I know I can do this physically. Like there were some things I hadn't experienced. Like I mentioned, the thunderstorms at 13,500 feet in Colorado that tested me. Hiking alone in Grizz country when I did the PNT, each camp, like I was alone during the day, but each campsite I was with someone, and that's in Glacier. It starts in Glacier. And so when I was in Glacier again on the CDT, there was a lot of it that I was solo. And then, you have Grizz country all the way through the Wind River Range of Wyoming. And so being alone for so much, you just kind of get used to it, but you're still scared at the same time. And so you have these
Mhm.
conflicting thoughts like, um, you can do it, but it's also like, what does that sound? And
Yes.
as far as thoughts that I would have, there's different things that I implement during each day. So usually I try to start the day without any noise or, podcast or music or anything. And everyone does this different. I know some people look down on listening to stuff, but to each their own. And so for me, I love learning. And so I'll put in a pod during the day and something I can learn, usually some sort of like emotional, sociological, psychological, some sort of development where I can either learn in terms of aspects of other people's perspective or I can try to better myself. So that's really important to me, and a high value. So I'm doing that often on the trail. If it's a steep climb or the end of the day and my brain just can't process anything anymore, I'll turn on music. Sometimes I'll go weeks without listening to anything and just be with my own thoughts. I mean, honestly, it seems like hikers are thinking a lot, and they are, don't get me wrong. But I mean, you don't know how long I'll just go hours and a song is stuck in my head, and I'm not just like thinking about something specifically. It's just, I can't
Yeah.
get a song out of my head. Or I'm like, I wonder what kind of tree that is. Oh, that's a pretty bird. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
obviously everyone's different. But for me, it just depends on the time. Like right out of town, I got my social time. And so I'm ready to kind of be in my head. And so I don't play anything. On a really steep climb, I'm sweating. My pack is heavy because I just got out of town. I hate everything. And so I put on music or even a pod or something to take my mind off of it. And
Mhm.
you could argue that that's taken away from the experience. And I could see that. But we all have different forms of motivation because what's the difference between someone next to us talking to us and someone talking to us in our ears? I mean, sure, it's more
Yeah.
social and your brain lights up different ways, but we all have those different ways of getting through adversity? And so
Mhm.
that's usually I wouldn't call it a system, but I kind of oscillate between my brain,
Yeah.
and then sometimes you can only take your brain for so long.
And I feel like as long as you're not like, I guess in my opinion, like I have personal opinions about people like playing music and podcasts out loud on trails,
Sure,
especially if there's other people around. But
sure.
this is also something I've thought about recently. If something is not like, it's if it's my personal experience and, like, this is what I want out of the experience, it's like I am in full control of, like, yeah, whether or not I wanna listen to music or a podcast or be by myself, and it's like, as long as it's not affecting someone else's experience, it's like, you can make that whatever you want it to be. It's
But
just
yeah,
when it starts to, like if you start being the kid with, like, the boombox on the trail, I'm sure that, like, you'll not make friends fast.
no,
So,
you won't. Although I
yeah.
have
So
realized that bears or grizz at least don't like Taylor Swift. Sometimes in Glacier,
okay.
if no one else is around, I have my shoulder pocket that I have my phone in, so it's right next to my ear, so it's not super loud, but the bears can hear it easier. And I've noticed when I don't play anything, I'll come up on a bear within 20, 25 feet, and we'll scare each other, and it's not great. But if I have something playing, even just the lowest volume, especially T Swift, they run away quick.
Okay, that's good to know because I'm terrified of bears, so I'm
Yeah,
always
pro
like
tip.
I'm grateful that, like, Salt Lake area does not have a ton of bears. I know, like,
Yeah.
up in Park City and the Uintas we do, but, like, the immediate area and so I'm kind of grateful for that, but I think also maybe one day I need to get over my fear and just run into a grizzly bear, so
Oh, well, maybe
it
not run into, but yeah, just being
yeah.
around the area I think is the worst because we had 7 come through the campsite where, I met a few people right after I tagged the Canadian border. They're right before I got there, and so you better believe I was like, "Hey, can I camp next to someone?" And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I still get that, but if I'm alone, I just deal with it. I had to do that on the PNT. I had to divert 15 miles onto a CDT alternate because all the campsites were full, and I crested a ridge and right away I saw a huge grit, like the biggest one I've ever seen, and 2 cubs that were also huge for cubs. And I just like crouched down getting water and I looked up and I saw them. I was like, "Oh my God." And so I just stayed crouched and got my water. And then when they got a little further off, it was like 20 minutes. I just crouched there. And then I just grabbed all my stuff like in my arms, didn't even put it in my bag and just walked away. And then there was a storm coming, so I had to like run down the mountain. It was an insane day, but um you just when you're in the situations and you have no other option, it's different than I have an option and I don't want to deal with this. Does that make sense? And so,
Yes.
yeah, um I think when you're out there, it's different than when you're speculating at home. So when
Mhm.
you're out there, I think we often surprise ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's the consensus I've gathered, like, especially just talking to so many people on this is like it's like, if you have to figure it out and you're in a situation, like, we are designed to survive, and it's just like, you will think of the thing that you need to do, but it's like, I am not gonna think of what to do if I had that situation sitting on my couch at home. Like, it's just, like, not gonna happen. I'm curious how you reintegrate into life after stuff like this. I know you said you've moved a lot, and so I'm curious more about how you kind of have settled in all these different places and then how you reintegrate after an experience of like 50 days alone and just your time on the trails and how that kind of feels.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll explain a little bit about what I learned from hikers and then I'll do my experience.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, I just want to give their 2 cents in this too.
Mhm.
So a lot of hikers expected the trail itself to be the hard part, but what blindsided many of them was getting home,
Yes.
especially the longer they're out there. And it's regardless of whether they were by themselves or with a group. And so on trail, life becomes incredibly immediate and tangible. Eat, walk, solve problems, talk to people. There's clarity in that.
Mhm.
Then we get home and suddenly re-enter inboxes, bills, productivity culture, social expectations, decision fatigue, even small things like going to get gas or going to the store. And a lot of hikers described feeling disoriented rather than triumphant, at least at the end. And I think it's relatable beyond hiking because any major pursuit changes you faster than the world around you changes. Reintegration is often the process of figuring out how to carry parts of that experience forward without expecting life to stay exactly the same. And so for me, it's different each trail. So I'll go through a couple different experiences. After the AT, 2 days later, I led staff training for Ohio University, where I was a grad student. I was in charge of the TRIPS program. And so I led a staff training for them, and the students came and we went up to the Vermont Long Trail, which is my first thru hike, and we did 2-week freshman orientation trip. So that was why I had a huge deadline. So then right after that, I went back to my second year of grad school. I didn't really have time to think about, like, I missed it, and I missed my hiking partner, and I missed, being in the woods, but I didn't really have time to, a lot of hikers call it post-trail depression. I call it post-trail transition. I didn't really experience that too much just because I went right back to all my classes. I had a community. I had a ton to do. I was so busy, and so that helped. After the PCT the following year, I had a little bit of a harder time. That trail was extremely different in terms of the experience because I was so alone. I had so many hitches. I barely hitched on the AT. I stayed in people's homes, trail angels, and it was a different experience. And so I felt more in nature, felt more disconnected. I felt more independent out there. And so I got back, and it was tough in the sense that I missed it. And now I have to get back to like to-do lists and spreadsheets. And I started a new job in outdoor education. I was the director of outdoor recreation at the University of Illinois. And so again, it was kind of hard to miss it for too long. I finished the PCT in mid-November, and then January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I moved to Illinois and started a new job. And so again, it was a couple months of missing it, and then it was like, all right, we're right back at it. I think it helps because what we really miss is the community sense of purpose or meaning, and basically just feeling more simplistic, I think, and a little bit of disconnection, but also connection in a different way. And so I kind of had that in a sense. And so what really hit me was after the Pacific Northwest Trail. I had a trail family the entire time. That trail was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I got home and I had to wear headphones to the grocery store because I had so much anxiety. And I I would get out of my car and pump gas and then get right back in my car and wait for it to fill up and then get out again. I know you're probably not supposed to do that, but that's how hard it was for me to integrate into the simplest things. And I talked to a couple military friends of mine, and I know it's similar. And that's the book I'd like to write after I finish all these trail books with all the research that I've done, because it's so universal. Everybody goes through this experience, whether you're retiring from whatever job, professional athletes, after they finish, they miss that sense of, they have a routine and teammates that they can rely on. And then after Peace Corps, after the military, every single person goes through that, something like that. And so I think it would be really helpful if people had more of a blueprint that other people, or at least hearing other people's stories of what they go through, is like, oh, okay, I'm not, as I think a lot of people feel alone after something like that. And then that makes it worse. And then we don't reach out to other people. And so that's always been a priority of mine. I think that's what has made it easier for me. One of my number one priorities is community and connection. And I'm usually the one to reach out, and that's fine, because otherwise, what's my alternative? Just be by myself? Sure, I can do that, but that's not the better alternative for me. And so that's kind of some of my experiences. After the CDT, I think I was pretty competent in being alone, especially for 50 days. And I still wanted to talk to people. And by the end, I was tired, I was smelly, and I was ready to be back in my routine, or a routine that was a little bit different. But I think we go through these phases, because you can't just, or I can't just live on the trail, but I can't just not go through hiking or even backpacking. I can't just never do it again. So where does that leave me? That has to have some sort of balance. And I know things are never really even on the balance scale, but it's like sometimes the backpacking side of the scale is a little bit lower. And sometimes, our routine and our productivity culture, maybe our work, whatever, is a little bit lower on the scale. So we keep kind of switching, And so that's balance to me is we're going to get outside and disconnect and then we're going to come back. And then, but what are we taking from those experiences? Because what is learning and understanding without implementation and reflection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I know that I think I saw on your Instagram, was it that you hadn't backpacked? You haven't gone on a backpacking trip in 3 years?
Yeah,
Is that
I did less than a week in Oregon a month or two ago before I moved. And
okay?
that was my first time in 3 years. I told someone a piece of my soul has been dying each time I can't go backpacking. And they're like, oh, boo hoo. I'm like, think of, whatever the greatest thing that you love to do. Like you feel like yourself, you can be silly. You don't have as much anxiety. I'm not as much in my head. I still
Hmm.
have things that I deal with, but it's at a lesser degree. Just the people I feel like I can connect with easier or at least quicker.
Yeah.
Not everyone. It's not a general slate, but just think of something that, you feel like that's who you are when you're there, but you can't do it. You've been held back or held off. And so it's hard. Have you experienced that with
Hmm.
ultra running?
I actually experience it more with traveling than I experience it with ultra running because running is something I can pretty much do wherever I am. And I'm really lucky in that of like this year I'm training for 100 miler and it's like, well, everything's kind of training. And like I can, yeah. So that's, but for me, it's really traveling because I spent a few years traveling and um, I spent some years like working in hostels and just being in other countries and not having like this, like you said, like hustle 9 to 5 culture that we have in the US, like very much living a life of like, I will be spontaneous and kind of go as the world takes me. And um, that is definitely like, I haven't taken a solo trip in like 2.5, 3 years now too. And I just booked my first solo trip. I'm leaving on June 28th and I'll be doing a trip on my own. And that was why that question came up though, because like the last question I sent you, which I think was like about how you can be so comfortable, right? Like you come home, you've reintegrated, you've rebuilt a life for yourself, you have community or you have these comforts and these routines. And then it's like, it's so easy to just stay in that and to maybe let pieces of yourself die a little bit, but it's like, oh well, I have this job and this routine and this life and it's so easy to stay in that. And so then just thinking then about the discomfort of like, I'm going back on the trail, I'm going traveling, I'm going whatever it is for anyone. It's like that piece is also difficult to have these experiences, to come home, to reintegrate, to finally feel good, and then be like, you mean you want me to do that again? And that's where I
Okay.
struggle because,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, first, I was curious, what race are you training for and where are you going for your trip?
I'm training for DC Peaks 100. So it's actually just right here in the Wasatch. It's the Davis County 100. And so I'll go up like Francis Peak bound. It starts in Memory Grove up like in the avenues. And then it'll go like up Francis Peak, Bountiful Peak, kind of through Mueller Park area and end at Tunnel Springs. So
Very
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and then my trip, I'm going to Europe. I'm gonna do the UTMB course as like a
Oh,
training camp
lovely.
for myself. So I'll do like fast packing because I've never done that before, and I'm not a huge backpacker, but I'm kind of in this middle ground of like I want to run, but I want to run for like days. So now I'm trying fast packing for the first time. So
Yeah,
I'll do that for 5 days, and then I'll go to Madeira in Portugal, which I've never been to, and I'll do some running and beach laying there. So
very cool. That's
yeah.
exciting. I'm excited for you. You're going to have a great
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, so that's one of the questions I asked hikers, especially after the AT. I think starting the PCT, I started asking things like, why can't life be as simple off trail as it is on trail? How do you keep your appreciation for the little things when you get home, like running water or, hikers literally scream when someone gives them a Gatorade on the trail or a cold soda. And like, it's just different.
Mhm.
And, we're choosing this. So it is a level of privilege. And it's not just like, oh, I don't have any running water. Woe is me. It's, we're choosing this. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. But it's also, yeah, how do we keep that appreciation or at least the recognition of those things and the difference between, not having to filter your water out of every single stream all day, every day for months, and then getting home and you literally, you turn a handle.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people say that they just need to go back out there and that's how they get that appreciation back. And some people say reflection helps. I think both is true for me. Each time I go out there, I get home and I try to keep that appreciation as long as possible. I was just talking to this about, with a friend of mine yesterday is, when people live by the beach, they get so, not necessarily maybe jaded, but they just get used to it. But I go out there, I've seen the ocean, 9 times, not that many times throughout my life. And I'm like, it's the ocean. Or now that I'm here, it's like, oh my God, I came from Houston. So I'm like, I this is insane. How is everyone not standing outside looking at the mountains all day? But we adapt as humans, so we get used to it. But for your question, honestly, I think familiarity changes my relationship with fear, because the first time I was afraid of the unknown. Can I do this by myself? It was more, can I do this physically? Am I going to get eaten? All of the fears, all of the fears. And later, I know exactly how hard it can be, but I also know that discomfort is survivable. I know that difficult moments pass. I know that meaning often appears after the romantic excitement goes away. And so I'm prepared. I don't think experienced hikers leave, or at least I can only talk for myself. I don't leave because I expect constant happiness. I think I leave because I miss the clarity and the simplicity and the aliveness that I mentioned earlier that difficult experiences can create, and the views and the people, and it's the combination. And I just don't get that in everyday life. Maybe I will here because I'm more around mountain people, but on the trail it's just different. You all have that common goal. I talk about this when I do speaking engagements, that it's easier to find commonalities when you can see them. And when you see that other people have a huge backpack and weird tan lines, and they also need to shower just as much as you do, and they're eating just as many Snickers bars as you do, then it bridges connection way faster than if I was walking in the city. I see someone, I don't know if we have anything in common, I can't see anything. And so it's, ultramarathon, I used to do triathlons, when you see someone in the gear, when you see someone doing what you're doing, you automatically say, are you doing this trail? Like, do you have blisters? Whatever it is, you automatically have an in to start talking. And I think a lot of people, when they don't see any connection, they're too afraid to start talking. I'll talk to anybody, but especially after through hiking. But I think a lot of people, if they don't see that, they don't say it. And so in some ways, the willingness to begin again for me, despite knowing the cost, is its own form of trust in myself.
I love that. Yeah. Something I like to ask everyone on this podcast, is there a piece of advice that you've received in your life that was like the best piece of advice? And then if you could offer a piece of advice to your younger self, someone kind of like in any of the situations that we talked about, what would it be?
Okay. So I have a couple of things for this. So I love that you added the younger self, because I haven't thought about that. And I've journaled about that, but I haven't thought about it in this aspect. So I love that. So I'll start with, I kind of said it earlier. So the piece of advice that I often give, people ask this at my talks a lot, is, basically what you just asked. And so I say the hardest part of anything new is starting. And so if you can start something, it's likely that you're going to at least try it a little bit further. And anything new, you're not going to be great at. So I know I already mentioned that, but that's actually what I tell people. And I'll add to that you're not alone. You're not alone in starting something new. You're not alone in being scared. You're not alone in being bad at it. It's everyone. And so just remember that. And then bridging that with my younger self, I would say, don't be afraid to ask people for help, because being the only girl, I have two older brothers, and I was the only girl in percussion. I was a music major and I did percussion since I was in 5th grade. I was always the only girl, or usually. And, I've been climbing since I was a sophomore at university, usually the only girl. And so I would say don't be afraid to ask for help because it's not going to make you look or sound or be weak. And don't confuse independence with strength. It took me a long time to see how isolating that made me. And I think that's what I tell my younger self, because I would just like stick it out, figure it out, suffer fest, struggle bus, whatever it was, but I ain't asking for help. And then, as I got older, I started doing that more. And now, especially with through hiking, you have to, and I think that has translated to other areas of my life. And the best piece of advice I've ever gotten. Okay, this is going to sound strange because it was probably when I was like 9 or 10, but my middle brother, one time we walked in somewhere and I would just be so scared or embarrassed. Like, what are they going to think of me if I do this? Because I would do anything he would do. He was my hero. And so he would skateboard and I would rollerblade. And I don't know if you have these when you grew up, but in Houston, we had these huge ditches because it rained a lot. Just right next to the roads, like huge, almost like half pipes. And so we would skate those, bring a huge boombox, play like Green Day and all these crazy things. People at school would be like, I saw you like on the side of the road. I'd be like, yeah, that's me. And so we would walk in places or go to, skate parks, theme parks, whatever it was. And I would do whatever he did. And he would see that I was scared or nervous or embarrassed. And he'd be like, hey, just remember, you're never going to see any of these people again. So it doesn't matter. And it sounds so simple, but it's stuck with me. And I think I've told myself in the last week, you're never going to see these people again. It doesn't matter. Just be yourself, do your thing. And like, that's all that matters. And so, that's one thing I've tried to keep in mind. Be yourself. It doesn't matter. It matters more than myself than what other people are going to think, even though my brain tells me otherwise.
Well, it always does, but like, it's like the right people will stick around. And it's like, right, like if someone doesn't want to be your friend or in your life is like wholly who you are, then it's like, okay, thank you, next.
Yeah, or even strangers. My brain worries of like, what if they like think I'm weird for like doing this or wearing that or whatever. My brain is my brain. And so, that's any situation. I keep that in mind. And it's not always, a perfect solution, but that's one thing I would say.
Awesome. Well, Savannah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for listening to the Blue Rose podcast. If you love this episode, please hit follow, leave a review, or send it to a friend who's building their own bold life. Keep trusting yourself, and I'll see you next week.